Is no result.
So not many people know this about me, but I love horror. I grew up on horror movies, I've been to multiple haunted houses, and I even played a couple of horror games on this channel. So it's pretty rare for me to get scared in general, especially if it's something like a piece of paper. However, for the past couple of months, I've been obsessed with this one piece of horror media, and it's probably one of the scariest things I've ever read. Masaki Nakayama is a well-known horror mangaka in Japan, with series like Office North Star and the Seeds of Anxiety series under his belt. He's often praised for his creepy and extremely detailed artwork similar to the likes of Junji Ito. But while those series were made first, PTSD Radio is his best and scariest work of fiction. As of recording, there are only 3 volumes out, and sadly, it doesn't seem like we'll be getting any more. So join me on this adventure to uncover the mysterious and frightening cancellation of PTSD Radio. For those who haven't heard of this series, PTSD Radio is an anthology horror series that follows different short stories that all intertwine and connect at different points. It's a pretty complicated read at first, but every chapter is titled after radio channels and follows what looks like a different entity. Each chapter on average is 4 to 15 pages long, and at the end of each chapter, there is a black page with white text at the bottom left corner, with the next page slowly revealing a distorted face or entity. This series has gotten a ton of praise for not only being creepy and terrifying, but also having an interesting sense of world building and mystery when it comes to its complicated timeline. Many fans have tried to uncover its mystery over the years, but so far, we only have a small piece of the puzzle. In Volume 1, the first 4 or 5 chapters are seen to be random stories. It isn't until Chapter 7 that we see our first reoccurring character, Chifuyu, a young woman who was seen getting her hair shaved off by her grandmother as a child, and then as an adult getting her hair yanked by what seems to be an angry spirit. At the end of the chapter, it's seen that Chifuyu is free of her curse and has passed it on to Kieta, her ex-boyfriend who was seen abandoning her in a flashback after one of her attacks. After that chapter, it starts following different groups of people, like a group of bullies who bully a boy for money until they're stopped by a weird-looking boy, 3 boys who open a cursed box with a doll's head inside, a grandmother and her grandchild praying to a god, and many more short stories that don't seem to connect. Once you finish the first part of Volume 1, you can start to piece together the story, starting with Chifuyu's backstory with her grandmother cutting off her hair, the bullies, and the 3 children. The second part continues some of these stories or gives more context to them, with some chapters in between that don't fit either story. However, fans have speculated that one way to piece the timeline together is by getting all of the radio channel titles and listing them from lowest to highest. Chapter 15 is the first point in the timeline, and it is set in a very traditional environment due to the clothes and buildings that we see. And Chapter 3 is the last point in the timeline set in modern age. We know that these radio channels represent time due to chapters 1 and 5 and chapters 9 and 11 not only having a 0.01 difference in their radio channel, but also their events taking place immediately after one another. This theory would make a lot of sense if it weren't for a major issue. In the second part of Volume 1, they give us more radio channels to fill in, except that it doesn't fit well with the timeline. For example, Chapter 18, aka the Staring Girlfriend chapter, is shown to take place at the same time as the Chifuyu's storyline, which is in the modern era. However, in Part 2, Chapter 30 is a continuation of the Staring Girlfriend story. It could be that this is a new boyfriend dating the same entity and that's why it's in 2 different points in history, but that doesn't explain why Chapter 28 takes place after Chapter 7. Not only does Chapter 28 show us the first time Chifuyu and Kenta are together, even though they had separated earlier, but it also shows us a copy and paste of the bathroom incident that Chifuyu talks about. Not to mention the number of problems with the timeline and the other volumes that don't make it any easier. Volume 2 gives us more timestamps that don't fit the timeline either. So another way fans have tried to connect them together was with the black pages with white text at the bottom. Some text would be shown as a complete sentence, but eventually you'll only get pieces of a sentence, whether it's the beginning, middle, or end of one. So if you go chapter to chapter, you get a bunch of incomplete sentences and random phrases. Even if you try to match it with the timeline, it still gives us a bunch of gibberish. At this point, no one has been able to put together a full timeline. However, a majority of the stories can be connected by one entity or god, and that is Ogoshi, the god of hair. Ogoshi is represented as this worn down and destroyed statue, but while it's out traumatizing people, it can take up the form of multiple entities. It's known to not only be responsible for all of the entities showing up, but also for all of the worshippers going mad and spreading the trauma of Ogoshi. It's shown in every short chapter and continuation story we've seen so far, but we learn more about it in the story of the bullies. A group of bullies were bullying a student for some money, but were then stopped by a weird-looking student named Hamaguchi. Hamaguchi traumatized one of the bullies, Nakada, to the point where he lost his mind and got sent to a hospital. We see Nakada writing the same phrase all over his room, "Ogoshi-sama is coming." We then learn that in Hamaguchi's previous school, another student who was bullying him suffered the same fate. Hamaguchi has been obsessed with the statue of Ogoshi-sama and is now tormenting anyone who bullies him. Later in the future, we see the grown-up versions of the bullies each getting attacked and suffering the fate of Ogoshi-sama. We even get an origin story for Ogoshi-sama in this volume. A pair of sisters live in a small village with their mother and grandmother. They get lost in the forest trying to find their father, and their mother tells them if they ever want to go back home, they have to donate a bit of hair and pray to Ogoshi, and it will guide them back. After the sisters' prayers, Ogoshi guides them back home and becomes the god of guidance for the villagers. Over the years, the statue began to deteriorate, and when a couple of construction workers tried to get rid of it, it angered and unleashed the spirit of Ogoshi. This volume gives us the biggest piece of the puzzle that we've been struggling to solve, and hopefully, Volume 3 will give us more answers to not only the timeline, but also the spirit of Ogoshi. But sadly, the third volume would not only be the final installment of the series, but also reveal the terrifying and real reason for the cancellation of PTSD Radio. Volume 3 starts like normal, a bunch of short stories related to Ogoshi, except at the end of part 1, we get these pages from the author himself, Masaki Nakayama, who says, "The following pages contain a special collection of true horror stories depicted as close to reality as possible. The following episode was prepared as an apology for the lack of releases during my hospitalization. I drew it in my hospital room as I confusedly parsed what happened to me." After drawing a scene that depicts a man with a rotten mouth, the author himself starts forming black blood blisters on his tongue, lips, and gums. On top of that, he started to notice blood in his urine and purple spots all over his body. He goes to the hospital and doctors tell him that his blood hasn't been clotting, and with no real reason as to why. In the chapter, he blames it on the little Ogoshi bugs he drew in volume 2. In reality, he was diagnosed with ITP, so he had to be hospitalized for 2 months, only being able to draw 6 pages during his stay. The next chapter tells a real story of the author moving into an office space to work on this manga series. In the closet of his new office, he found a piece of a broken home shrine inside. He pretended to not see anything and continued on with his work. Soon after, he began noticing weird occurrences happening around the office, like hearing footsteps on the roof and multiple problems with ventilation, lighting, and electrical systems. The creepiest encounter was when Masaki was on a phone call with his mom, and his mother heard a voice calling out to him while he was home alone and had no assistance at the time. He soon packed up and left the office, but while packing, a physical phenomenon happened to him that he refused to comment on. As soon as he moved into a new apartment, he told his assistants of all of the weird stuff that had happened to him. As soon as he was done talking, he smelled a weird odor coming from his mouth, and 2 days later is when the blood blisters started forming and the inside of his mouth was rotting. Masaki tried to keep quiet about the encounters and just focus on drawing, but eventually he had to give in. In the next chapter, he details all of the strange and paranormal activities that had occurred in his life while writing the volumes we've been reading. From tamed incidences like every clock freezing in place, to near-death experiences like the people hearing his encounters getting fevers and injuries. He breaks his silence and warns the readers to quit reading for our sake, but here is where he tells us his most terrifying experience yet. Masaki noticed a foul odor at the entrance of the first floor of the office. When one of his assistants went to check it out, he said that it reeked, but also noticed pitch black holes on the ground. It wasn't ink spilled on the floor or holes leading to a basement, just pure darkness. Another assistant went to check it out later that night, and that was the last time she was ever heard of. Another assistant complained about someone standing outside of her bathroom door when she was using it, saying she could see the back of somebody's head. When a different coworker goes and checks the hallway, he notices a black shadow looking into the bathroom window. Every assistant who experienced these kinds of things have either ended up with fevers or just up and quit, but everyone had seen some sort of black shadow lurking in the office space. It's then later revealed that the physical phenomenon that occurred while packing had to do with this black shadow. The final chapter of Volume 3 is another continuation of his true horror stories, and takes place during the making of Volume 3 Part 1. Masaki talks more about the times he tried to tell people about his encounters, and how they all ended up backfiring with personal injuries and hospitalizations. As soon as he reached the final stages of production, the right side of his face started to swell up. When he went to the hospital, the doctors told him that he was perfectly fine, and at that point, Masaki gave in to the forces at work. Something was trying to tell me, don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. We won't allow you to say anymore. The final page reads, "This will likely really be the last time I talk about this subject. I'd rather not have to go through any more trauma like this, so I've decided to stall, or rather abandon, any further inquiries altogether. Thank you for understanding." PTSD Radio has to be my favorite piece of horror content of all time. Not only is the mystery and storyline very intriguing and engaging, but the artwork for these panels is extremely detailed and creepy. It makes it even creepier knowing that while we're reading this series, the author was being tormented and experienced what seemed to be a curse. I had a blast analyzing this series, and it's a shame that we won't ever see an ending. However, I just hope that Masaki is safe and happy, and if he ever decides to release another volume, I'll happily pick it up and read it. Whether you think the series is cursed or not, I say it's definitely worth the read. I could not recommend it enough. And what are your guys' thoughts on PTSD Radio? Is it cursed? Is it not? Did this video creep you out? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video.